Yes.
Where is my camera?
Good morning, everybody. We are now live. This is Senate Economic Development, Housing and Rural Affairs. We are going to be talking about H703. We have the bill?
Yes, right here.
Okay. So look, before we get started, welcome.
Thank you.
Senator Mark Kimball. We're glad to start reviewing this bill. As I talked to most of you, we hit some snags on our economic development bill, but we have voted out in this committee, and we're happy to come in at any time to your committee to get you started on that. If you could look beyond the formality of you getting the bill, which, as we know in this building, anything could happen.
It's never stopped.
But we're willing to start. I think it's pretty in final form. I think it was 5-0 vote here. I don't anticipate that it changes.
Okay.
At this point. So.
Okay. Yeah. And then this morning, I got ACCD coming in, but we're going to talk about the grant that EDA, the EDA grant that was
$1 million.
Yeah, it was received for post-COVID planning.
Right.
But we're going to talk to them and get Cassie coming in from VDOL also to talk about those two pieces that are in the bill. I think next week we'll invite you to come in. We'll set you up afternoon better for you.
Yes.
Okay. So we'll set you up in the afternoon.
And probably good for us to get together.
Yeah,
for us to get together too.
Yeah. That might maybe Friday afternoon. That would be if you have time.
Okay, we'll figure a date out.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that, got a nice long bill, as is ours, with how many pieces, programs?
68 pages.
40 sections of bill.
40 seconds, comparable.
Okay, our economic development bill B271.
So,
You only know. You added another few sections.
can I ask a question up front just to frame something? How much money is this?
41 million. Yeah.
41 million. Then you also have the arts and culture bill came out of your committee, right?
Yeah, 624.
Yes. Okay, let's get started. I don't know who, Representative Morcano, I'll let you run the show, however you want to start presenting this bill to us. All ears.
Okay, I'll let Vice Chair Kimball, he was a reporter of the bill on the floor, so I'd let him go through it with you. You can assist with any other questions that might
I
pop
think
up.
we have time set aside. We have all morning.
You're going to need it. 2 hours and 15 minutes.
And I think we have all morning tomorrow.
Right.
So we'll certainly hear from David Hall. And what I started to do, correctly if I'm wrong, I don't know if Scott has or someone has reached out. In terms of us scheduling witnesses on these various sections, I wanted to hear you guys would be the perfect, what are the biggest dollar-wise or complicated-wise? Start with those sections first and get the witnesses in and go to your list of witnesses.
Yeah, we forwarded our list of witnesses to Scott, so you have that. It's dozens.
No, I know, I saw the list,
Yeah.
it's voluminous, but I'm trying to figure out where to start. I don't
Yeah.
necessarily want to start with section one if it's a small
Right.
piece.
Right. So as we go through, we can share with you.
Okay.
What was the vote in committee? It was 11-0-0.
Every vote in Congress is 11-0. Okay. For 40 years.
It was 139 to nothing on the floor.
Yeah.
As well.
Big surprise.
So with that, Mr. Chair, I hope that we can just put some of the bill in context as
Please
to
do.
why we're doing it that way. So for the record, Charlie Kimball, Vice Chair of Commerce and Economic Development.
And Representative Michael Marcotte, Chair of House Commerce and Economic Development.
So there was a shortage of workers in Vermont before COVID-19. In 2018, remember, we passed a comprehensive workforce development bill to align the interests and career aspirations of workers with the needs of employers and with the education and training providers in the state. But then there was COVID, right? The public health emergency derailed many of those initiatives. So some of the stats that we are working with is the workforce shrunk by 26,000 individuals from January 19 to 2022. Workforce participation rate fell from 66.9% down to 60.6%. There are approximately 28,000 job openings now as of January 2022. The unemployment rate is just 2.9% in February now. And while 9,945 individuals meet the federal statistical definition of unemployed, just 4,500 individuals are receiving unemployment right now. So we try to look at this as, is there something the state government can do to address the state workforce shortage? So Tom Cavett has told us that there's no such thing as a workforce shortage. It is rather an imbalance in the supply and demand for labor. You can either fix that by increasing the demand through higher wages or increasing the supply of workers through immigration. Easy.
Wow.
But the market has reacted in kind. The effective minimum wage right now is $17 an hour. In our discussions, the effective minimum wage is $17 an hour. After our discussions with several employers, starting wage for an orderly at a hospital, starting wage for somebody flipping burgers at a fast food restaurant, you're talking about they have to offer a minimum of $17 an hour to attract employees.
Right.
So on
Is
that,
that testimony, or is there anything in writing in terms of studies or details behind it? 'Cause that would
Testimony.
be very useful.
Yeah, testimony. We don't have, I'm sure there is somewhere where in terms of average study of wages, and the Department of Labor may be able to help provide that data if you need it.
Yeah, I mean, we have, there's a minimum wage piece in our bill
Yeah.
as well. The thing that's, I certainly anecdotally, that makes a great deal of sense. That's exactly what we've heard as well. But it's always great if you have something where it's actually been documented someplace in terms of providing support.
I think the difficulty is the lag time in terms of getting that.
yeah, so as you probably know, our minimum wage, which I like to say, is really not necessarily a minimum wage bill to raise the minimum wage, because we have, as you said, kept that minimum wage.
Yes.
More to preserve that inflation rate. So if you've got 5% on 12.55, we're not helping anybody.
Yeah.
Right.
So we look to see if there are barriers to employment that could be reduced or removed. So could we ease licensing requirements, for instance, or better accommodate individuals with physical or mental disabilities, or those recovering from addiction? Can we make an easier path for a fully engaged life for incarcerated individuals? Can we suspend the reduction of benefits if earnings exceed existing limits, and do the same for retirement benefits? Is there some way we could increase the employee retention rate in state government and elsewhere during this extraordinary stressful time? Could we convert college students who are full-time temporary residents into full-time permanent residents? In this bill, we've done some of those things. In the longer term, how can we better align the needs and career aspirations of individuals in the state with the job opportunities and education and training necessary to work in those fields? In the House budget, you will see increases for UVM and the Vermont State College System, $10 million increase in the base budgets for both of those. Also increases in the 802 opportunity scholarships, the advancement grants, and also adult education and learning is increased. In H703, you'll see funding for scholarships or forgivable loans, really is how we've made it, and loan forgiveness for nurses, nurse faculty, trades professionals. You'll see continued funding for the Serve, Learn, and Earn program that was stood up last year through FPR. In H171 last year in 2021, we allocated significant money for scholarships and loan forgiveness for early childhood educators. In this bill, we restate the importance of early childhood education, but no new money. You'll see continued interest in working with career and technical education centers, solving the conundrum of governance and finance, providing students with opportunities that are not open to them now, and aligning the building trades programs at CTEs with our statewide goals of housing and also weatherization. So it's a big bill, 40 different sections. We've worked hard to refine and tweak it to the best of our abilities, and look forward to what you can add to it and the time. We worked to the last minute until the budget was out the door with us. After passing it, we had version 10.1, and then in our amendment, it was 6.1. So we've done several iterations on both of those.
Is the $10 million for UVM and Vermont State Colleges, is that primarily targeted towards workforce development, or is it just a general budget?
General increase in the budget. Yeah, not workforce development.
Which it's not reflected in this bill.
Oh, those asks are not in here?
Not at 703.
No, those are in the budget.
So that's just a general overview. So this is further descriptions.
Right.
So we can go section by section. Is that what you'd like to do?
We're gonna have to do it at some point.
Yep, okay, let's do it. Okay, so section 1, and both Mike and I have different strengths and weaknesses throughout these different program areas, so we'll go back and forth, if that's all right. We haven't rehearsed this, but so
I thought
section.
your presentation on the floor was a dress rehearsal.
Well, yes, it was long. That was amongst all or most all of the members of the committee at that point in time.
Oh, that's great. That's unexpected.
We had in section 1, immediate strategies and funding for expanding the workforce. So we have a $2.5 million grant to the UVM Office of Engagement, working with BSAC to disperse forgivable loans of $5,000 to graduates from both public and private colleges who take jobs in Vermont. So there's 1,000 potential recipients if you do the math. The Office of Engagement, first we asked BSAC if they could do this. They said this is not the program that we could administer, but we can certainly provide help to UVM Office of Engagement. The Office of Engagement said, we don't do this now, but we could do it. And that would be open to all colleges, public and private, throughout the state, not just UVM. So in the Vermont Higher Education Council in fall 2020 report on higher education enrollment, talks about there's approximately 40,000 students enrolled in the 17 Vermont chartered institutions. 60% of them are from out of state. 73% are full-time, 27% part-time. So if you look at this idea of they're already here, these colleges have done a great job of marketing to them to bring them here. This is an opportunity to have them stay here on a more permanent basis.
So this is up to, it's a forgivable loan for $5,000. And it is forgiven after 2 years if they're still working here.
Yes.
For any graduate or of a college or UVM.
Of any college, public or private. So we talked with the offices at Middlebury College, University of Vermont, the state and independent colleges, their representatives, state college system. Can't remember if we talked to Norwich. We did.
Well, that's within the independence.
Yeah, within the independents. So we talked about their internship program, what they're doing right now. We also talked about the software that is available to them in terms of lining up students with either internships or jobs in Vermont. A platform that's called Handshake that's widely used among colleges and also students looking for jobs. For instance, UVM uses this, so does Middlebury. The Vermont State College System doesn't use it yet because of the cost of getting into it. We spent a lot of time talking with the Vermont State College System as to how they work with their students. As you know, a greater percentage of their students are coming from in-state. So this is not only for out-of-state students, this is also for in-state students once they graduate in order to stay.
And is Handshake a Vermont based? I mean, why wouldn't you use, how does it differ from something like Indeed?
It is more tailored to students graduating from college. So it's a very more narrow platform. But it's increasing in popularity. It's interesting to watch these ebb and flow, the different platforms. So Monster.com was huge for a long time, and now Indeed is the big daddy. No, that's a different platform. Indeed is the big player in the market, but Handshake among college and secondary and post-secondary institutions is now the preferred, or at least the one most talked about. We didn't really know anything about it until we started taking testimony.
So, you know how we struggled, and you did as well, I think, in terms of the recovery grant programs, having offset for other monies that people have got. Is there anything here? I mean, we're going to get into, I think we're getting into other things like nurses or other professions where people are getting help from another program. Is there any overlap where we would consider saying they've got money elsewhere for attention to stay here, and it's just, you know, we had it added on.
We didn't see any overlap with these particular
Because this is
programs.
people right out of college, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And nursing probably is, well, aren't there nursing forgiveness
Yes,
programs or
we
something?
already
people
have
right
these
out
for
of college? So would they be able to qualify for both?
Would hope that would not be the case.
Well,
That's the one that jumps to mind.
yeah. We didn't talk about the duplication of that particular benefit. You could explore that.
Because we're struggling, obviously, to make this money go as targeted and go as far as possible.
Right. So I have a question about 2 years. Does the math work out that if a student at a lower salary, obviously than somebody who's 2 years older, does it work out that by the end of 2 years, through taxes and expected revenue of the state, that 2 years is the sweet spot for what we get for that $5,000? I mean, why 2 years?
We're looking for just a longer term commitment, so there
Right,
wasn't- there was no economic ROI on
Okay,
that.
so you didn't
2
do it
years, no.
market. So if there wasn't any economic ROI on it, what is the reason for just 2 years and not 5, for example, or longer?
While we didn't explore 2 versus 5, we're really cognizant of, and we didn't have technically on this, but with the millennial or post-millennial generations, the idea of locking somebody up for 5 years when they're coming out of college,
Yeah.
doesn't seem like it's going against the tide. It would be going against the tide. So 2 years we thought was, in all the other loan programs, forgivable loan programs we have, generally it's at least a 2-year commitment. So if we talk about a nurse forgivable loan incentive program, not a nurse scholarship, is that 1 or is it 2?
They want, but those, they continue on those forgivable loans, like for a nurse to pay for tuition reimbursement, continue on. So for every year that they stay in the state, they get 1 year of tuition reimbursement.
Right, and it's tied to the number of years they stay.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, great, thanks.
So that's the first 2.5 million.
Right.
Marilyn Cargill from VSAC was helpful in any kind of loan forgiveness program and tuition repayment program. So she would be great to have on that, as well as Chris Kaliba and Kirk Dombrowski from the Office of Engagement.
There's I assume, even though the language says who commit to work, just a commitment, the interpretation of that is that they actually have to have worked for 2 years in order to have the loan.
Right,
Okay.
right, yeah. The next is $500,000 to the State Refugee Office to administer its grants to refugee or new American focused programs working in Vermont.
What about this 387? Meat cutting.
Oh, did I skip over the meat cutting?
Workforce development.
Yeah, it's probably the most important.
First,
Oh, that's why, because I had reordered the order, yeah. Yeah, $387,000 to the Vermont Technical College for the meat cutter training program. So the total cost of this program is $937,000. That includes the construction cost of $637,000, of which an application is made to the Working Lands Enterprise Board for $250,000, leaving us $387,000 gap for those construction costs. They've got a separate grant application into EDA to cover $300,000 in staffing costs for the lab directors. The lab director, I think, for 2 or 3 years, I can't remember. So that's the total. They originally came to us with a request for $300,000, and we know that there's a gap. The $87,000, so it's a $387,000. So we can talk about this is the Mad River food hub that did have also a meat cutting program that's been oversubscribed. There's a waiting list for a meat cutting program. People are doing this program in New York. So with all of the smaller farms that are also raising different kinds of meat for resale and butchery, they have a shortage of workers to actually service them. So this is addressing that particular need.
So I have to ask this question. So this is a brand new program that we're trying to put together the funds to get it up and going, and there's a clear need. And some people come and join, but at least I have, and other members of this committee have been working for years with the Vermont Technical College to get them up and running on a dental therapist program. Do you know if that's still languishing while we go ahead and fund a new program here?
we did talk to them about their dental therapy program, and we spoke with Pat Bolton about that particular program from BTC. Can't remember the status of the dental program.
I don't.
Yeah.
We've been trickling in money over the years for whatever they need. They keep needing more.
Right.
They keep being, so I see this and it sounds comparable, meat cutting and gum cutting. You know,
Yeah.
Well, when she comes in, we'll get an update.
Yeah, just wonder.
Yeah.
I hope we can get closure on that, because that seems like a great area to get the corner on the market. If we could. And actually west of the Mississippi.
East.
East.
Another interesting program there that you're probably aware of is their Advanced Manufacturing Center. So they have a significant amount of capital equipment that they've received funding for from the federal government. And they're doing some pretty incredible things with their Advanced Manufacturing Center.
Is that in here someplace?
It is not, they didn't need any funds.
They're
for all
doing
of that.
pretty well on that, all on its own.
Back to
And
refugees.
actually, a number of our CTE centers have advanced manufacturing
Yes.
equipment and are feeding into this program. So actually, that's one of our good progressions of skill accomplishment and attainment.
You know, we spoke to a woman yesterday who had her just received from she's from Castleton. She received her certified training from Stafford in Rutland.
In the welding.
And now she's in the welding program, yeah. So the $500,000 State Refugee Office is to administer grants to refugee or new American focused programs. Working in Vermont to support increased in-migration and retention of recent arrivals. We met with Tracy Dolan, who is running the program, refugee program for the state of Vermont. We talked about new immigrants that are in Brattleboro already, that are Afghan.
And Syrians.
Yeah, we talked about their current status, which I believe just in the last week has changed. But anyway, so we talked to her for a long time. Doesn't anticipate that they're going to have an increase in Ukrainian refugees.
That was at that time. Things are changing in that realm now too, that it looks like there's gonna be at least 100,000 Ukrainian refugees coming into the United States. And I think the governor is hoping to resettle some of them here.
So the Afghanis had been on humanitarian parole and not as official refugees, but the average resettlement from, according to Tracy, has been in the past 350 individuals per year. It slipped to 23 per year under a previous administration, and right now it's 220 Afghanis so far. Those are the numbers that we got from Tracy.
So this is pretty wide open as to how they can spend the money. I mean,
Yes.
You envision a contract with, forgive me if you said this, but a contract with who would administer this?
It was through the agency.
Through AHS, I think.
Well, it's a sort of performance-based contract. We usually don't contract with another agency.
The Agency of Human Services provide grants, yeah.
And it looks like a contract with
So for a
two
performance-based
refugee
contract.
programs. So some
Two
agency that works with refugees already.
Yeah, but it already exists.
provide, yeah.
I would assume it would just go straight to refugee. It's just renamed itself, right? Can't shut it. What's it
I
called?
mean, yeah, in the legislation I introduced, I named them directly because I just feel like we don't need to go
I
between,
think-
it's USCRI
Right.
and ECDC in Southern Vermont. are
Yes,
the two
you're right.
that-
Yeah, those are the ones we talked about.
Right.
So our appropriations committee does not want us naming who the sub-grants go out to.
Okay, but it is envisioned that it
Yes.
won't be administered by the state. They'll contract out.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, and so they could do pretty much anything that meets the goal of increased immigration or retention. So they could pay security deposits or something if they wanted to, like housing.
They needed to.
Did you take any testimony in terms of how they would use the money?
Yeah, because this isn't job related. There's nothing here that says it's designed to help them actually become a productive member of our workforce right away.
Right, I mean, we had a number of conversations, whether it's translation or if it's training or if it's some kind of transportation.
I assume it was your intent, or would be your preference, that it be somewhat job related.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, right.
I mean, I personally wouldn't narrow it, and these people got $1,250 when they arrived, and are living in borrowed housing. You know, I just,
Right,
like, we need to help them economically
but
stabilize.
the point of this bill is workforce development. These are people who are coming, most of them very trained in all sorts of things. I think the challenge is, particularly with refugees, is how do we take those skills and talents and put them to work as soon as possible in Vermont? And then that's the purpose of this bill, is workforce development, not general assistance.
How many people are we expecting at this point? Do we know at all?
300.
300. So, I mean, are you suggesting that we could do a supplemental grant program with this $500,000? Just divide 500 people cash?
No, I think.
No, I mean, I don't think that's the intent of the House, but if we leave it open-ended like that, that could be the,
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know where the performance base comes in there. That word performance base may be the connection to workforce training. Just giving people a check is, I don't know if that's performance.
I think if, with all due respect, I think if it's in this bill,
I agree.
we want to help them be as productive with the skills and talents they're bringing to America as possible. And I think that's what this needs to be focused on. There is general assistance elsewhere in our budget for.
well,
the
remember,
refugee
this is
program.
through AHS, and this is about supporting and retaining recent arrivals. They have seniors with them who need support, they have kids. I mean, I'm glad it's through AHS, and I don't think we should be narrowing it in any way, because these are people who came and got $1,250 to arrive in our state and rebuild their lives. So I just would leave it alone and let them decide.
Well, we're gonna have a lot more discussion.
Yeah, well, this is just the beginning. We're just starting here.
$500,000 is not a lot. I wouldn't narrow it further.
But we should find out what other help is in the budget already. Because I
I would
think
love
there's
if
quite
there's
a
more help in the budget.
This is over and above the governor's recommend, which was funded in the budget. And we did ask, we had the conversations
Right.
with Tracy on what she thought she could spend, because originally we put $1 million in there, which was cut back by the appropriations committee, but she said that the maximum that they could possibly get out the door would be $500,000.
The max, she said the maximum they could get off the door.
Yes, being over and above what their regular budget is already.
Tracy
No.
Dole said that.
Dolan, she was the, remember, the deputy secretary.
Right. I
Uh,
mean, she's
Or she's
not doing direct service.
She's running the refugee program.
She's running the Office of Refugee
Right.
Resettlement, which is different than
Right.
CRI.
We made it to page 2.
Crank it. Section 2 deals with CTE funding and governance. This was a bill that had been introduced in the House, number H483, that got folded into this particular bill.
Page 40,
483, yeah.
482.
And it's all about CTE funding and governance. So the first section of the bill is all the intent, and it goes through the history of how we got to where we are. It's well researched and well stated. It comes up to the study that was authorized in Act 189 in 2018. Remember, we authorized 4 pilot projects of CTEs to say, here, go out and do something innovative and creative with governance and financing. And then the Department Agency of Education determined that it was not a permissible use of funds, or they couldn't do that within statute to operate those CTEs in the way that we asked. So instead, they turned it into a study. And the study was done by Deb Wright and I can't remember his name, who used to be in the Agency of Education. And they did a study using 3 of the independent tech centers. That was both in Springfield, Bennington, and Middlebury. And
Bill Talbot.
Bill Talbot, thank you. And the report came back with a number of suggestions. We tried to, over the summer, meet with Agency of Education, also Career and Technical Education Center. We, meaning there's members of the Education Committee in the House and also on our committee, to come up with how do we move this forward. So working with AOE, it turned into a study to provide specific recommendations to the legislature to identify and prioritize potential new models of CTE funding and governance, to reduce barriers to enrollment, and to improve the quality, duration, impact, and access to CTE statewide. So originally, we had written that the contract was to go to Agency of Education. It was changed to the Joint Fiscal Office instead to administer the contract. And then from those results to charge the Agency of Education to come up with specific legislation for us to act on. This has been a long drawn out process. This is not new, but in the report that was issued in June, there was one line on there that said maybe you should create just one district for career and technical education centers in the state. There wasn't a whole lot of supporting information behind that. Interesting concept, but that merits further study on saying, okay, how do we really want to move forward? We can't just use a blunt instrument because we have 17 career and technical education centers. 3 of them are independent, 2 are private, and the balance are connected to the high school system. Right?
So we're trying to restructure our CTE programs to obviously to improve them, but there's a lot of questions that still remain to be answered before we can take action.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's sort of where we
Yeah.
are at the moment, which is a little frustrating given that's what we were
So
hoping
that's
to be
sort of-
2 years ago.
That's a little bit at odds to what the governor has been portraying, right? We need to really get those things going and put,
But we also have to understand the funding mechanism that we have now and how that's hampering students from getting into the CTE centers because the money follows the kid. So there's no incentive for those students, for the high schools to be sending students into the CTE centers. They lose money.
Right, our whole objective in 18 was to reduce the competition between high schools and the CTE centers. And it is very frustrating that 4 years later, we are still going to do another study. And I had hoped that Deb and Bill would have had, and I'm embarrassed to say I haven't read their report, but I look forward to. And they are still recommending that we need to do further work on this.
The problem that they had when they put the RFPs out for pilot projects.
Yeah, we only had 2 or 3
Well, there was
take-ups,
one,
right?
there was one, only
It
one.
was just Scott Farr who took it up.
That they reissued again. What was happening was that the high schools didn't want the CTE centers to participate because they were worried about the funding.
Right, it's all about the funding.
So that's why they directed their CTEs not to participate. That's what.
is it in some ways a turf battle?
It is a turf battle, it's a big turf battle.
It's all about the money, about how much money is available, who gets what portion of the pie.
I think one of the recommendations that was in the report was that you decouple the budgets from the high school, and so you have 2 separate budgets that get voted on. It wouldn't really change the dollar amounts, but it would. The CTEs would have their own budget, and the high schools would have their own budgets, and the kids would just flow back and forth
So,
I'm not,
without the money following it.
so I have to ask this question, in terms of this battle, is there anybody who could battle for the CTEs, or do they work for the school boards that may have preference for the academic learning? so they can't speak up as vociferous as might otherwise.
Yeah, so the CTEs the students there are only a small subset of the,
No, I know, but the CTEs are under the umbrella of the school district,
Some,
right?
not all. Remember, there are 3 that are independent.
Yeah.
And they are very articulate. And that is, in fact, we've gotten a lot of supporters from the independent. I mean, that's where who've been, quite honestly, the most articulate about challenges. But there are a couple other unusual ones there.
There's both St. Johnsbury Academy and they're private, but they have CTEs there.
Yeah.
And then the rest,
The rest are
There's a-
exactly what you described.
there's a few issues, right? I mean, one is that if you have the CTE attached to the high school, those are pretty healthy because it's easy for the kids that are in the high school to just go over to the same building. But if you have a sending school situation, that's where the difficulty is because of the 30 minutes they spend on the bus to get to the CTE, and then 30 minutes to get back. It doesn't necessarily align with their class schedule that they have at the high school. It interferes with their peer group. It interferes with their extracurricular activities. So that's part of the difficulty, not only for the school, but also for the student to make that decision. What we've heard in testimony and what you'll hear is that a lot of schools have stood up the old-fashioned industrial arts programs, even while our CTE centers are expanding their programs. So that's twofold. One is to introduce them at a younger age to some of the different work with your hands and the skills. But the other is to retain the students instead of losing them to CTE centers.
Right. So it's further competition.
That's further competition. And
so it is, but those taxpayers in the other school districts or the other SUs are paying for the career center.
Right.
And they're also standing up a program within their high school to do the same thing because the alignment of schedules and transportation and all that is just prohibitive. So we've got to figure out a way of figuring this all out. So those students and those taxpayers are getting what they're paying for.
And even we talked about even the buses. So if it takes half an hour to get from the school to the CTE center, the buses aren't equipped with Wi-Fi. So the students aren't able to do homework or do anything productive. I mean, you could treat it like a study hall period, but the buses aren't equipped to do that. So it's, I mean, you could come up, anyway, it needs continued work.
There's issues of accountability. If you have different people accountable for the same result, which is what it sounds like, as opposed to one person accountable for both at some point. Does that make sense? Because you've got 2 different people who have different objectives and goals. The student is in the middle between the 2, and that lack of accountability for the end result just seems to be the core of the problem.
it is, and I do empathize with the school systems because if talking to somebody in Southern Vermont, that if they lose more students to the Career and Technical Education Center, then they have to drop some of the programs they're offering to the rest of the students. And so if they drop this programs, quality of education goes down, and so it's complicated. So that's why, and further complicated by Act 46, which realigns some of the school districts that doesn't match up with the maps for the Career and Technical Education Centers sending districts.
Right.
So there's
It's a jumble. But you're right, the principal is divided. The principal of the high school, for example, has a divided loyalty, and there is, it's a challenge to find out who's
accountable
well.
for the end result is
Education.
the education of the student.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we need a benevolent dictator here.
Yeah.
To come in and say, we want to change the priorities, and we want to get rid of the stigma, and we want to get more people into CTEs, but the people who are very instrumental in making those moves have other interests in preserving the academic side, and they have a lot of power. And funding it's all complicated by the funding formulas as well. But somebody has to see the bigger picture and say, despite your self-interest to protect this side, we've got to make some shift.
Well, in an ideal world, quite frankly, we would have completely figured out how to integrate this work with what sort of normal high school. I mean, we created this rather arbitrary divide between these skills. And it all should be, if I was redoing this, they'd all be in the same building. It would be a seamless integration. But sadly, they were not. And that is what we're left with, is a legacy program that is not well integrated in cases, except for those cases where they are co-located. And the real challenge is with those that are not co-located.
Well, where they're co-located, do you have any of the same problems?
Not as many.
Not as much for the students. I'm not sure if
The
the
money
same
is
holds true for the school.
And the money is still an issue.
And then to further complicate everything is the adult side of the CTE.
Oh, adult CTE is a different issue, but that,
Well,
Yeah.
the issue is with the adult side is that there's no one over and above the adult side of CTE. The AOE doesn't regulate.
Right.
You know, they have their own association, loosely knit association. They're trying to standardize some curriculum that they teach around the state. But still, we don't have that overarching body overlooking that. And so we issued, we asked for a report last year. That's in the process now. So with this report, we also talk about that report and making sure that when they're looking at this issue, that they're looking at that other report. So, our idea is that you have a seamless system that when you graduate high school and you still need more training, that you seamlessly go into the adult side of the CTE.
Right. And critically important, if we want to bring people back into the workforce after they finish parenting or after they finish doing whatever, that we have a robust, easy to enter adult CTE program for them to participate in.
Okay, so does that bring us to section 4?
It does.
Okay.
It does. We're on page 6, so we're moving right along. So this is the investment and the upskilling of private sector employers for the evolution of business. Originally, this was specifically directed to an organization as the Professionals of Color Network. And our appropriations committee did want to, again, remove the name of the recipient. So this is $250,000. So they are a fairly new organization organizationally,
Right.
in terms of forming their 501c3. They now have 3 staff members, a full-time director, and are doing statewide work. So this was $250,000 to support their work. They're also members, as you I'm sure know, in the Community Navigator program and the hub and spoke model, where they are one of the 9 spokes funded through the Small Business Development Center, where Linda Rossi is the overall coordinator. She's the hub at the Vermont Small Business Center. And then Vermont Professionals of Color Network is one of the spokes receiving some funding from that, but also this then tags onto their funding. You'll remember that we did commission a study that was to convene stakeholders across the state to determine what the best organization would be to represent BIPOC-owned businesses, and our bill last year and our budget. That contract had been scheduled to be let out. An RFP was issued. It was decided to grant that contract to the Partnership for Diversity, which is Curtis Reed's organization down in Brattleboro. There was issues with issuing the contract through the Buildings and General Services, who does that contract process for the state of Vermont. When we took testimony in late January, we were anticipating that we'd have the finished report in mid-February based on the date that the contract was awarded. It was then that we found out that the contract had not been consummated and the work had not been done. Since then, we know the contract has been signed and that they will be doing the work. So that is in parallel to what this is. So when we've talked to folks within ACCD, we've talked to folks either with Curtis Reed's network and also the Professionals of Color Network, it's not a bad thing to have two running simultaneously. That was kind of the conclusion, that they have the network in Burlington has established themselves as a credible statewide organization with great organization and great services and a strong membership. So that's what we're here for. They have, I think, 255 businesses in their directory, the Business
Wow.
and Professionals of Color Network, and 3 staff persons now.
That's great. I mean, they've grown by leaps and bounds in a very short time frame. That's great. Oh, page 7.
No way, we're on page 7 already?
Yeah, we're just zipping through here. We'll be
Okay,
done by 5.
regional workforce expansion system. When we first started work on 703, it was a short form bill. And it was the longest short form bill you've ever seen. So there was a much different construct for this section of the bill. The one that we're presenting here, we deliberated extensively over as to whether or not this type of program belongs in state government or outside of state government. The proposal that we had before us before was to create a separate contract to be awarded to a statewide organization that could stand up workforce coordinators in different regions of the state, 6 of them, to better connect employers with employees and also educational training opportunities. And so that was, Advanced Vermont had been kind of the umbrella organization discussed for a statewide contract for that, but we got through many discussions. We worked with the Department of Labor closely.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because they have, I think that was their aspiration, wasn't it? To
It
have-
was, and the governor's request was to have, it was $2.7 million. And it was, part of that was for workforce expansion, the other was for worker relocation assistance. So what we looked at is focusing on the workforce expansion program. This proposes in the final iteration to create 4 new full-time equivalents, 3 people to be out in the field in specific market areas. The ones that we've discussed with the Department of Labor would be St. Albans, Rutland, and Brattleboro, where there's some vestige of the old Workforce Investment Board structure to be able to access the people that are already in the market and to better coordinate between employers and employees. So to convene stakeholders, figure out what the needs are. There's a similar program going on through one of the workforce community challenges down in Springfield. Their mission there is a little bit different, is to look at all the different wraparound services that are needed to increase workforce participation rate.
So we have in our bill something that I think is certainly overlaps. Heather Pelham came in and developed a proposal for $8.5 million for retention and sort of a continuation of things a lot.
Yeah.
And this seems to be a little bit more targeted and to workforce retention and stuff, but I think there's room to work to combine those in some ways as opposed to having separate programs, but we'll see.
Yeah, so we didn't move on that part of DOL's request, the 1.2 million for the worker relocation assistance, kind of like a concierge service. We just focused on workforce development.
Right.
So there's another piece
That
of this.
wasn't Department of Labor, that was also ACCD.
Yes, you're right.
Right.
Yeah.
But DOL had these offices in like 6 or 8 locations originally. There was one in Hartford in the new state building.
They're one-stop shops. I think
Yeah,
there's
the
12 of
one-stop
them.
shops.
12 of them that are organized in 5 different regions throughout the state. They report up to Sarah Buxton on workforce development. So
You're focusing on 4 of them now?
yeah, so there are 3 regions. Really to prove that this works. There is within the House skepticism as to whether or not this could work. As you know, we have not funded with general fund dollars Department of Labor employees out in the field. It's all federal dollars.
Up until the 12
Right.
million.
So this is an investment and a program to see, should we be putting state dollars in this area?
Just 2-year pilot. I
2-year
see.
pilot.
Is it an ARPA money or
General fund money.
could it have been ARPA?
We spent a lot of time, or the appropriations committee did, reviewing that, and I think the conclusion was no.
Okay. We're gonna take a break in 5 minutes, because I know Mike needs to go run his committee. But let's see if we can find a good stop.
So that's to your phone. Well, why don't we get through this? Because this is a bit, I think.
Yeah, so the other part of the money, because it funds both those 4 positions,
Yeah.
it also then requires participation from the Department of Labor Market Information, Matt Barrowitz's shop,
Right.
provide with data to help better inform those employers in the region, and also the training providers. But the other piece is it uses money to kind of substitute funding for some of those folks in the workforce expansion or in the existing DOL employment structure. Part of what we received testimony on is that if it's really narrowly focused by the federal funds that are funding that position, then they cannot get outside of their lane easily because they have to comport with the financial requirements of the federal funding. So this provides them with more flexibility by substituting some general fund dollars rather than the federal dollars. So that's all part of that. So this is an effort to really use some general fund dollars to focus on workforce expansion.
So in,
So this is, excuse me, second person. This is not only is it focused on workforce participation, but it's as opposed to our money which goes to ACCD. It's focused on not only newcomers, it's existing people, where ours is focused mostly on attracting new people, getting them
Yes.
set up.
It's necessary. At the same time, you know, VSAC has the development officers, other officers, can't remember. There are people throughout the state that are distributed to work with individuals as to what are the educational opportunities, what are the training opportunities you need in order to qualify for that particular job or skill. So they work often, they're co-located with the Department of Labor. So they definitely assist. DOL currently works, as you know, closely with Voc Rehab, with Creative Workforce Solutions, and Faber. So as they are working inside of the different communities, so DOL is doing that work now, and they talk to one another all the time about, hey, what is going on at that employer?
Mr. Chair, I would just, I'm skeptical, so I would need to see a lot of data about where they, like what people who come into Department of Labor are reporting not getting, how many people Department of Labor is seeing. I mean, you talk to folks at Berry and they'll say, we have 300 job listings and 3 housing listings, and that's our problem. So I just need to know that this is actually solving the problem, and we're not just throwing $1.5 million at something that people on the ground say is not going to help them.
Well, the list of witnesses that the House is enormous, and we're going to try and hear from as many people as possible on all these programs. So this is just the first walkthrough.
Yep, I'm just not sure where the money's going and that it actually addresses the need.
well, and one could go back right to the beginning and say, okay, well, that federal money's been going to this for a while. Why don't we have more results to show for it?
And when we gave money to housing to create 6 positions, they said limited service is really hard to hire. And this is 4 limited service positions that never got filled. Then we came back a year later and they said, we just don't even have people because we can't even fill these jobs. It's just, I think it's a housing problem more than anything.
Well, but we're trying to solve that in another bill, is trying to solve that in actually several bills.
Just 2 other things on that. The number of employees out in the field over the last 20 years, funded by the feds, has gone significantly down in the DOL's regional offices.
They
Yeah,
contracted that big time.
And so that, you're right. So in terms of are they effective? So some of it is they have fewer people out in the field. And we have not, as a legislature, increased funding to do that. in order to fill those spots. But you're right, housing is a big thing. The other thing is that in 2019, there was a series of workforce summits that were conducted through the regional development corporations all around the state. And while each report was slightly different, one of the overriding themes was that they wanted to have a regionalized workforce expansion program that understood their region, that could then work with employers and employees on a much more intimate basis because they knew who was doing what, where, and where. So, I mean, we're a small state. Does that make sense? Probably. Geographically, they're very diverse areas.
And the overlay of the economic development corps, of which we have what, 12?
Well,
I mean, because this is also their bailiwick, so I assume you integrated their. I mean, in some ways, they should be the ones partnering with DOL on this.
Well, and that's the other workforce community. That's the Good Jobs Challenge application. That's a totally separate thing that we know about, but we don't know if it's going to be awarded. Highly competitive. Yeah.
So I'm sensitive to the time, Mike, just you have to leave. I'm Charlie, you want to say more about?
I'm yours. No.
Okay. So why don't we